wonder why fund managers can't beat the S&P 500? Because they're sheep. And sheep get slaughtered.
The numbers told the story, they always do.
Money never sleeps, pal.
Because all we care about is getting fucking rich. You connect points I don't even know to look for.
The most valuable commodity I know of is information.
Public's out there throwing darts at a board sport. I don't throw darts at a board. I bet on sure things.
Welcome, Karma Clan, to this week's edition of the Sports Trading Desk. I'm your host, Brett Matthew, along with my co-host, Corey Larson. Zach James continues to be over in Germany contracting COVID. So he's still out of the picture for now. Still providing us with intel and research and information over our private channels, but due to the time constraints and the different timing zones, things like that, just unable to join the pod, but he will return in a few weeks. So we are a quarter through the season, just finished up week 4, and we've had relatively lukewarm performance, I would say. We close week 4 with an uninspiring 2-3 record in the core Sportfolio, and I think we pretty much went 2-3 across all different platforms and contests. So again, just kind of lukewarm performance. We look at our benchmark of looking at the consensus top 5 picks from the Super Contest. They have also had very lukewarm performance. So we've been hanging around pretty much exactly with the benchmark. Again, our goal is to outperform that benchmark, outperform the consensus top 5 opinions, and outperform our broader competitors. But at this point in time, we're not doing that convincingly through a quarter of the season. So we still have a strong 13 weeks left in the season. It's a long road. And we have a lot of time getting a little bit more, better perspectives of these teams, isolating their strengths and weaknesses, understanding a little bit more how injuries are going to play a larger impact over the course of the season, looking at significantly less penalties being called, how that's impacting scoring, and really driving the performance around the offenses much more so than the defenses. So with that, let's dive in to our week 4 picks, talk a little bit about what went right and what went wrong. So in our NFL Bet Karma Core Sportfolio, again, we went 2-3. We had the Giants plus 13.5. That turned out to be a much easier cover than probably a lot of us even anticipated. Texans -3, a game that they probably should have covered. Just ineptitude in the red zone really cost them that cover, but I feel like really dominated that performance. Bears +3, dead wrong. Jags +3, dead wrong. And then Bills -3, which we're covering for most of the game. Raiders made a little bit of it at a game in the third quarter, but the Bills pretty much were winning by 3 for most of that game and won pretty convincingly in the end. So again, wrapping it up 2-3, outperforming or in line with the broader consensus top 5 picks from the Super Contest. So let's dive a little bit into these picks, Corey, and talk a little bit about what we saw, what we didn't, what was our rationale, and where we think we were wrong. So let's start with the Jags pick. So the Jags it was a game that I personally didn't like a lot at all. I think I originally leaned Jags, but as we looked a little bit further into some of the more micro statistics and looking at a lot of just the film, especially from the most recent Bengals game versus the Eagles. If you check out our weekly X-ray report, that was one of the games that we highlighted. We talked about what we saw in that game. And even though that game ended in a tie between the Eagles and the Bengals, saw a lot of really strong positive components from the Bengals, a lot of really great key takeaways that suggested that maybe the market was still a little bit down on them than they otherwise should be. And so as I saw that, as I started to dive into a little bit more, I didn't lean Bengals in a strong way in the sense of wanting to actually make it an allocation, but I didn't see the rationale or the argument around Jags +3. Now, I was way off in a few other games, maybe some games we aren't necessarily going to talk about in this, but one of the games that we had in our picks was I had Niners. Corey, Zach definitely disagreed with that pick. I went on an island and did my standalone fundamental analysis. I thought I was on the right side. And if you look at the Eagles-Niners game too, in fact, the Niners played pretty strong in that game. It just came down to some key mistakes by Nick Mullins that really turned the tide in that game. But nonetheless, taking the Niners -6.5 was just not the right side. But in this going back to this Jags-Bengals game, we slid Jags into core because we want to try to represent, the broader core portfolio strategist team's opinions, even if we don't 100% agree on some of the allocations, just so kind of like most of our views are represented. And we know that we're not always going to come to 100% consensus perspective. So with that, Corey, how would you describe kind of like what you were seeing in the Jags Bengals? Where do you think we went wrong, and where do you think we can improve on that?
Yeah, so I think initially in the week, I kind of jumped on the Jaguars +3, and I initially liked that. I thought the Bengals were maybe a little bit overrated. They had some high conversion on fourth downs, some strong turnover numbers, as well as some just yard per play differential that just wasn't very good. So I thought some of the scoring was a little deceiving that they're putting up so far. But, kind of looking back on it, I think where I maybe went wrong with that a little bit, this Cincinnati team, if we remember from a year ago, I think they maybe had almost 6 to 8 single-digit losses. So they were in a lot of games last year despite the pretty poor record. So this team might be even – I think they maybe were started a little low. And I think Joe Burrow's honestly overperformed. They're throwing the ball an awful ton with him, but they're able to move the ball pretty well on offense this year, even no matter who they've been playing. I look at this game and I see just the offenses both were able to do kind of almost whatever they wanted. More so for the Bengals, they were averaging 6 yards per rush as well as 8.1 yards per pass. So it's just a lot. I think what ended up kind of screwing me over, I did start realizing I didn't have a great strong handicap on this game as the week went on. But I saw the market moving, and sometimes when that market moves, so this line, I think closer to when we maybe threw it into this portfolio, was closer maybe 1.5 plus where it was at that time. But I know this game closed almost close to pick. And I think at that point, sometimes you can let the market kind of convince you, okay, the market agrees with me. I got a really good value there at that for a contest pick, for example, that +3. So you kind of get convinced into your maybe initial handicap that maybe wasn't that strong. So my initial handicap kind of grew colder as the week went on, but I kind of let the market probably just overrule that. If that line stayed at 3, I think this definitely maybe would have maybe not really found as much on our contests and cards.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great points. And, the thing is with line movement, the way I like to view it is it's definitely important, and it's something that you want to take into consideration, especially when it comes down to, actual allocations and whether you actually decide to fire on a position or not. I don't necessarily think, it goes too much into actual handicapping, but as far as conviction, it can definitely influence you. The thing is when I see movement in my favor in the direction of my handicap, in most cases, I would say it doesn't increase my conviction, and I think it shouldn't increase our conviction. Vice versa, if you have a handicap and the line is moving against you, and especially if it's moving against you convincingly, I think that's one of the things where you should maybe overweight it. Maybe you're missing something in the handicap. You have to, your conviction should move down. And in fact, in most cases, what I really like to do is if the market's going convincingly against you and you have a strong fundamental standalone handicap, in most instances, I feel like it's probably better that you just take it out and you don't fire and, wait for something where you either have neutral market movement, minor market movement, or market movement in your direction. And again, the market moving in your direction because it doesn't increase your conviction. It's just you maintain your conviction. And that's one of the reasons in this Jags-Bengals game, for instance, like I outlined, is, I didn't see the view for Jags, the line moving in the favor of the Jags. That didn't necessarily convince me that was the right side, but it would take me off, because I would lean Bengals. The line's moving against me. Maybe I'm missing something. And this is one of the reasons why we allocated to it is, I know you like Jags. Zach really likes Jags. And I thought maybe I'm missing something, and again, it's just one outcome. So, it's not to say that, that this was the true perspective of these teams matchups. Like, who knows, maybe the Jags win 60% of the games and this was just one of those 40% of where the Bengals cover and win straight up. But
right. Yeah. I think the only logical explanation here when we really look at it is it's all Zach's fault. Blame the guy overseas. So.
Well, I mean, that's obvious. I didn't want to say
for
it.
Himself.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to be a little bit more delicate about it, but I mean, pretty much, our underperformance lines up exactly with Zach's departure to Germany. So, make of that of what you will. So moving on, Bears +3. So this line hung around 2.5, 3 at home versus the Colts. Colts have put in some mildly bad and mildly good performances. Haven't played the greatest competition, but neither have the Bears. I think what we got here is confirmation that, anytime the market gets too hot on Nick Foles will remind you why you shouldn't do that. And, again, some questionable play calling, uninspiring performance on the offense and defense. I mean, nothing in this I would necessarily take away that I feel like is very strong or makes me bullish or wanting to upgrade the Colts. But I think the Bears, are a team that could have easily been 0-3 going into this game. And I think, maybe that's something that we didn't appreciate as much as we should have. We had an opportunity to get that 3. I think that probably tilted us into the direction of the Bears too, which maybe if this hung around 2.5 or even moved in the opposite direction to Colts +2, and we only could get the Bears at a worse price, maybe that's something that we don't allocate into this. But this was just a pure misfire. Any thoughts on this one, Corey?
Yeah, I agree on the misfire. I think the Colts receivers being banged up, I kind of maybe overvalued that. I think this Colts team is just very strong on both the offensive and defensive line, that they're just going to be a very consistent team. They're not a team that maybe just because they're traveling to Chicago, kind of out of their element, that they're going to lay an egg. I think the Colts are probably one of the top 5 most consistent teams we might see in the NFL this season. Not necessarily saying they're going to be one of the top 5 best teams from a week-to-week basis, but I think they're going to be rather pretty consistent. So I think that's kind of my main takeaway.
Cool. So on the Bills and Raiders game, now this is one that kind of a similar sentimentality is I did not like the Bills in this game for most of the week. And I didn't necessarily like the Raiders. I couldn't really come up with a really great reason to lean the Raiders, but this just didn't seem like a great matchup. Not for matchup. It did seem like a good matchup for the Bills, but it did not seem like a good spot for the Bills. So, traveling across country, 3-point favorite. Raiders have put in, some good performances. Their defense is definitely struggling, and they're also suffering from injuries, whereas the Bills are still relatively healthy. Bills are obviously very hot. But the Bills also have their weaknesses as well. Probably got away with one in the Rams game. Should have beaten the Dolphins and Jets more so than they did. They let those teams hang around. So I thought, maybe they could definitely let the Raiders hang around and maybe the Raiders win this game or it's a push. But I really took it. I know you liked the Bills a lot, Corey. I know Zach loved the Bills. And this was an instance where your guys' handicaps actually convinced me. And, this was one where, we kind of allocate, we have this, side spreadsheet where we allocate all of kind of like our favorite picks and kind of understand where we're all leaning. And, I think I ended up having the Bills, in my top 3, top 4 picks by the end, when at the beginning of the week, I wouldn't have had them in my top 7. So this was an instance of really great instance of where we were a little bit splintered on opinion, but where, we come together, we handicap together, we outline positions, make arguments, debate. And this was one where I felt convincing that you guys sufficiently convinced me. And actually, I wanted to go much deeper into Bills. So this was a nice one. This was a nice win. Bills won this one pretty convincing. Do you have any thoughts on this game?
Yeah, I think one of my main handicaps for this game was that the Raiders just kind of had some cluster injuries. And on top of that, I think the Bills across the board were just a better team at pretty much every matchup within the game. So I think just looking at that, it made the Bills at that field goal number. It made it seem like it was definitely the right play. I had a little concern about the spot, but outside of that, I couldn't really find much to even consider to play the Raiders in this spot. So yeah, and then kind of seeing how the game turned out, I think the Raiders honestly played the Bills pretty well. And this game could have maybe honestly went maybe a little bit different way. Just looking at they were able to move the ball versus Buffalo. Buffalo hasn't had quite the defense they've had had last year. So I think that's something we really want to monitor going forward. I think they're coming in ranked, or this next week they're going to be ranked like around the 20th best defense in terms of just different statistics in DVOA. So I think that's something really to monitor. It's really Josh Allen, the reason why the Bills have seen so much success early. They've been able to put up points, and it's not their defense carrying them like it was last year.
Great points. Yeah, I think, that makes sense. I mean, the Bills have, again, as I mentioned kind of just earlier, is, they put in some performances where they're susceptible to laying a dud, in my opinion. And probably, there was games where they've had opportunities to win them in much more convincing fashion than they actually did. So they're sitting at 4-0 right now. I think everybody's upgrading the Bills. And yeah, it's just something that we want to be a little bit cautious on moving forward. Okay, so those were our losers, which again, or most of our losers, with the Bears and Jags there. Let's talk about another one of our winners, the Giants plus 13.5. This was more so a pick that I think we all leaned, but it wasn't anything that we had a lot of conviction on. I think it was more so just a game that it was just too many points. This was one of the biggest spreads that we've seen all season. I think it was just giving the Rams a little bit too much benefit of the doubt. We saw the Rams put in a pretty muted performance versus the Bills in the first half of that game. So clearly demonstrating that this team can get sluggish. The offense can, slow down, that this isn't the greatest show on turf or anything like the Rams that we've seen necessarily in the past few years. I definitely didn't necessarily see them laying kind of this kind of dud. Or the Giants defense kind of being able to get them on wraps as much as they did, but didn't suspect that this game would be as low scoring as it was. So the game didn't play out according to, I think, probably most of our kind of projected narratives. So maybe in that instance, we're just a little bit lucky that this one cast for us. Again, I know we didn't feel strongly necessarily about this one. It was more so just, hey, this just seems like too many points. This is something that you got to bet. But did you have any thoughts on this one, Corey?
I don't have too many thoughts on this. Kind of like you said, it was just kind of a lean. It seemed like a lot of points for the Rams to be laying. I think they were kind of overvalued in the marketplace just from those first couple of weeks, how much people upgraded them. So it was definitely the right side.
Yeah. And then our last pick, the Texans. So this was a game where the line kept trickling lower over the course of the week. I think it opened up around Texans 5.5, moved all the way down to 3.5, got to 3.5 reduced juice, and then we bought it to -3, which was premature because it actually ended up closing right around 3 and it didn't even have any extra juice. And that market pressure turned out to be right as the Vikings cover and win straight up. Not really sure. I gotta go back and look more closely at this game, because just looking at the box score, it looks like this was a game that if the Texans had a little bit better coaching, a little bit better decision making, that a lot of those red zone trips should have been converted into touchdowns. I think they had 20 plus plays essentially inside the 15-yard line, double digit amount of plays inside the 10, all resulting in field goals. You're not going to win NFL games if that's going to be the case, and you're definitely not going to cover if that's going to be the case. And that was actually something that we also saw. We had exposure to the Miami Dolphins in some of our contests, and the Dolphins played a relatively good game, but again, inside the red zone or inside the 30, 5-6 times, all resulting in field goals. Just not going to win games, not going to cover numbers. If that's going to be the case, very hard to predict. But we kind of know that both these teams either struggle from a personnel perspective in the Dolphins case, or from a coaching perspective in the Texans case. And so these are the types of things that can happen. Need to make sure that's kind of baked into your handicap. Nonetheless, I think we felt pretty strong that -3 was going to be a sufficient number for the Texans to cover. We're definitely super bearish on the Vikings. They've put in a little bit of better performance here. Justin Jefferson showing up. I think that's been a really big improvement from an offensive perspective. Cousins isn't making he's not putting himself in a position to ruin the game, relying a little bit more on the run game, relying on Dalvin Cook, relying on a conservative game plan from an offensive perspective versus in some of these games. And so this one just didn't go our way, but I think probably the Texans is probably still the right side. Do you disagree, Corey?
So I watched that game. I'm not really sure if I could really maybe say there was a right side to it. As to your point, the Texans, I think, had 10 plays inside the 15-yard line that they had a total of 3 yards across all 10 of those plays. So that was just how bad it was inside the red zone. I think additionally, matchup-wise, and maybe question a little bit, Houston just really couldn't stop the run versus Minnesota. Minnesota's yards per play don't look very impressive when you look at the game as a whole, but Minnesota was kind of able to dictate their pace on offense early in the game. So they were able to run kind of when they wanted, and that's kind of Minnesota's strength this year, is if they can run it and then just kind of Kirk Cousins, as you said, the play action. So I think a lot of that, just being able to kind of do it so easily versus Houston really made the job a lot easier on Kirk Cousins. When I look at Houston, I think they weren't maybe able to exploit. They didn't have the urgency they needed. The Vikings jumped up to maybe 17-3 lead or something like that. It was a pretty big lead that the Texans started closing in on. And the Texans were doing a lot of plays. They'd run it, get 2 yards. It was just not very appealing. And it was not until maybe the third quarter when they kind of just did a hurry offense. It was a lot of Watson, and they drove the field and scored with ease. So I think they kind of lacked the urgency earlier on in the game, and they were trying to maybe stick to a game script that wasn't working for too long. So I think that's what ultimately kind of put them too far behind in this game to really. So I do think this score should have been closer than it was. I'm not sure necessarily if this game were to be played next week, if I would want to back Houston -3 though.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to look at it too. And yeah, when I go back and actually rewatch this game and see some of the more details beyond the box score, get even kind of a better feel for the game and for both teams moving forward. And we'll see what the Texans look like in the future now with no BOB and all this. And if they really can improve, and it seems like that pretty much you put anybody there, that they're going to be an improvement. So we'll see how that plays out. And if the Texans can actually capitalize on some of the talent that they have, especially on the offensive side of the ball. So let's move on to week 5 and run through some of these games, provide you some of our just initial thoughts, initial leanings. We'll run through them pretty quick this week so we can get back to work and try to put together a much better and more compelling sportfolio performance into week 5, into a new quarter. So let's kick off. I'll get your thoughts first, Corey. We'll start with the Thursday game of Bucks Bears in Chicago. Bucks currently sitting around 3.5.
Yeah, so I think initially this line I think opened up closer to Bucks -5.5 after the week was played, and I've seen it kind of move back and forth honestly the last couple of days. But I don't know if I have a strong read on this game, to be honest. The number seems a little high for a game in Chicago. Pretty solid defense in the Bears, and just maybe the inconsistency in Foles. It's kind of hard to back. And I think this Buccaneers team is really starting to roll into form. So I think it seems like the right spot if you just look at it from a strictly number standpoint. But I think just outside of that, fundamentally, the Buccaneers are really starting to put things together. We saw it against the Chargers last week. They started off behind. Things weren't clicking early. They had a couple things not go their way with a punt return, I think, as well as a pick six. And they were down like 17 points. But this Buccaneers team, I think this offense is very potent and it's just very consistent. And I think this defense, as we've seen already, I think they're one of the I think they might finish the year as maybe the best defense in the league, to be honest with you. So I could probably only look at playing the Buccaneers in this game, but I can't say I'm loving it above 3.
Yeah. So a lot of pressure on the downside here. It's probably injury related. So I know Evans banged up, Godwin banged up, Scotty Miller banged up. So missing a lot of weapons. I think OJ Howard's on like IR now. So Brady going to be limited potentially. We'll see which of these guys will actually be available or not. I totally agree with you that, there's a lot of media focus on the Bucs offense, but the defense is probably their strongest suit. And I think both the offense and defense are going to get better and better. We were talking earlier today about, reevaluating our power rankings for a lot of different teams. And one of the things that I mentioned was, power ranking the Bucs today is going to be different 5 weeks from now. That's what I expect. I expect the Bucs to be power ranked better 5 weeks from now, because this is a team that's going to evolve and mature and develop better chemistry. And I think just get better and better as time goes on. But we're still in week 5, so we're not there yet. We're not at that week 10 power ranking yet. And the Bears are just sloppy, so I don't know what to expect from them. I mean, the Bears could have, again, they could be sitting 0-4 right now. And the Bucs, could be sitting 4-0. And still, even at 3-1, riding a strong reputation. If this moves down to 3, which it looks like it could, definitely lean Bucs, even Brady with no weapons. I think this is probably going to be low scoring. I think 44.5 seems a little bit high. I think, this could definitely be a low scoring, kind of like a Colts Bears type game that we saw, especially if Brady has limited weapons. So let's move on. Panthers, Falcons, Panthers at the Falcons. Panthers sitting at +1.5 right now.
Yeah, so taking a look at that number, I think in this game, there's a lot of injury concern, I think, on the Falcons side of the ball. I just take a peek at that, and their safety's just really banged up at safety. A lot of those guys are questionable. I know they lost maybe 1 or 2 of them, but I think that's really what this is going to come down to. And I think that's why we've seen the move maybe line drop down. I mean, yeah, Atlanta looked really pretty bad against the Packers, and the Panthers have put in some solid performances as of late, but I don't know. Panthers honestly are going to be the healthiest they've maybe been all season, minus McCaffrey being out. I think they get a couple pieces back. So this is a spot where I think both offenses will be able to do kind of what they want. And it's laying into that at 1.5. I don't know if I have too strong of a lean here. I'd maybe take the Panthers on the money line, but it just doesn't feel that great sitting with me. I like it more maybe if we try to tease this up, or if you caught it early, maybe at the +3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's 2 macro views here contrasting. That's really hard to evaluate. So the Falcons have put in some good performances, but just haven't been able to complete games. And the game versus the Packers was kind of the first game that, they weren't really too competitive in. The defense looks miserable. And so the price looks to be incorporating that. And this spread is much lower today than it would have been just 2 weeks ago. The Panthers have put in back-to-back strong performances, outperforming expectations versus the Chargers and outperforming expectations versus the Cardinals. Again, not great competition, so you don't want to necessarily overweight it too much. But this is a Panthers team that was only expected to win four, maybe 5 games. They're halfway there. So the market's definitely higher on the Panthers, lower on the Falcons right now. So it probably seems like a good time to buy the Falcons. The thing is, the Panthers look more level-headed than the Falcons do right now. The Falcons are completely chaotic, bad play calling, again, just disjointed, dysfunctional. And the Panthers, have looked pretty smooth. I mean, they've put in pretty much good performances all season. I mean, they have not looked as bad as the market suspected that they would be coming into the season. They played a strong game versus the Raiders, played admirably versus the Bucks, and then outperformed the last 2 weeks, as I mentioned. So, especially if there's no real home field advantage here necessarily for Atlanta, maybe this price is about right, and maybe the market's still holding on to the Falcons saying, hey, this team's really got great offensive weapons. We're still going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe this is the week where the market does finally give up on them, and they're no longer going to be a favorite versus really anybody, and the market upgrades the Panthers more meaningfully. I think right now we're at a tipping point, and this game will decide, at least for the next 2-3 weeks, how the market's going to price both these teams. If the Panthers outperform again meaningfully, win this game, by 4+ points, maybe even a touchdown, Panthers are going to get upgraded significantly. The Falcons are going to get downgraded significantly. And if the Panthers lose this game at home versus the Panthers, like, this might actually be when Quinn gets fired. And then maybe there is a shift there in sentiment and a broader culture. And the Falcons could be bet on then. But it's hard too, because Falcons bettors are not betting the Falcons anymore, because they've been losing, and they've been losing money, and they've been watching terrible games. So it's hard to say with a lot of those driving macro forces, but I would probably ever so slightly lean the Panthers here, but it doesn't seem necessarily sharp to do that, so probably not bettable. Raiders Chiefs off the board, Broncos Patriots off the board, Bills Titans off the board, Bengals Ravens off the board, Dolphins Niners off the board. So we're going to be able to skip a lot of games right now. There's a lot of uncertainty related to injuries and COVID and things of that sort. So not a lot to offer on those games. They might not even be played necessarily this week, or even if they are played, we don't necessarily know who's going to be playing, and that's going to be a really driving factor around the pricing of those games. So let's move on. Rams at Washington. Rams sitting at -7. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I take a look at this game, and I know the look ahead on this game was Rams -9.5. So we've now dropped 2.5 points. And I know that Washington has made a quarterback change from Haskins to Allen, but I know that's not the reason for this drop. I think a lot of the reason for the drop is how the Rams performed versus the Giants last week, maybe not so much how Washington looked versus Baltimore. I look at this game, though, and that number at 7, and I don't know. I have to lean, I think, Washington here. If Washington, I haven't looked at injury reports yet this week, but if they can get some health back on that defensive line, we know that's kind of where Goff can struggle when there's a strong defensive line. I think additionally from that, I think this Washington team, they've been able to, they've been respectable, I think, in some of those games. And I still think this Rams team is maybe a little bit overrated. As we said early on this season, we weren't high on the Rams, but we did actually week 1, and even maybe I can't remember who they maybe had week 2, but we said the Rams would do better early on in the season just due to McVay and just kind of his play calling style, and he's excelled with just kind of teams early on in the season. So I think as the season wears on, I think the Rams are going to slowly trend back to maybe where we initially thought they were. So I still don't think they're maybe there yet. So I'll lean to Washington plus the touchdown.
Yeah, I definitely lean Washington in this as well. Goff on the road versus a good defensive line usually doesn't pay off, especially at this big of a number. And Kyle Allen So Kyle Allen looks like he'll be starting in place of Dwayne Haskins. I talked about, I think ad nauseum on our preseason podcast about how I thought Dwayne Haskins was one of the worst quarterbacks in the league, and he did not deserve to be a starter. And now he's not. It's unclear what his future is going to look like, if it's going to be with Washington or in the league somewhere. But Kyle Allen, I think, is a very big upgrade. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be, if it's going to materialize in a meaningful way this week, given I don't know what his chemistry is going to be like with these players, etc. But I think it will be sufficient to cover a 7. And I think Kyle Allen definitely gives this team the best chance to win moving forward. I really liked what I saw out of him in Carolina last year. I think he got a really bad rap. He provided some bonehead highlight reel plays that I think kind of outshine some of his better performances. I think he put in a relatively consistent performance. And I think that with a strong defensive line, front 7, like Washington has, and Antonio Gibson, Terry McLaurin, I mean, they've shown flashes this season. There is some weapons there. They still have a questionable offensive line, and that's really always Kyle Allen's kind of biggest weakness. Doesn't take pressure super well, kind of just like Goff. Fumbles the ball, throws picks. So this could be a turnover-ridden game, but I would definitely lean, Washington +7, especially with Kyle Allen at quarterback. Jags +6 at the Texans. And the one thing I wanted to mention about the Jags, I think going back into our pick on them this week in this portfolio versus Bengals, was that the market was starting to overvalue the Jags, I think. Even to your opinion about the Rams, is some of these teams start off a little bit hotter and the market starts to believe in them, and then they get shown that how wrong that move towards in that direction really was. And I think the Jags maybe aren't as bad as we all thought that they were going to be. So maybe they're not going to be a 2-win team or a 3-win team. Maybe it is a 5-win team. So that does require an upgrade, but not a meaningful one. And I think the Jags still are one of the worst teams in the league, especially because you're going to get this two-faced performances from Gardner Minshew. You're going to get these crazy comebacks from him in games where he's, 21 of 24 for 220 yards and 3 touchdowns, mildly good games, very efficient games. And there's going to be games where he plays terribly, where he looks like he's not a starter in this league. It's just going to be hard when to really isolate when those things are going to happen. But he did not look good necessarily, versus the Bengals. The Bengals are a bad defense and they were on the road. Texans now have a new coach. So is this going to be like a really inspiring performance, or is it going to be disjointed? What do you think, Corey?
Yeah, so I take a look at this number, and I initially want to lean Jags with the +6. I think the Jags have ran the ball really well this year, and I think on top of that, Houston just hasn't defended against the run very well, so I think that might make things a little bit easier on Minshew. Additionally, this is a really weird spot, I think, is one thing that just kind of stands out to me. We have an 0-4 team that's favorited. That's actually only happened 10 times in NFL history. And that team then in that week, the 5th week after, or when they're 0-4, week 5, they actually are 3-7 against the spread when they're favorited. So not that that's really saying a whole lot, but it's just a very unique spot, I think, especially maybe laying a number like -6. I'd be interested to see how many times it's been that many points after going 0-4. Now, we do have to give to Houston's credit. They've played a couple of the best teams in the league. I think probably 3 top 8 teams. So to their credit there, you can't totally just call them a terrible team. But I do think they come into this game with a lot more maybe motivation. Not motivation's the word, but just a lot more just enthusiasm maybe for the future. Now getting Bob out of there. So I think with that, it makes it hard to lay into. I think to lay the 6, I would have to lean towards the Jaguars here. To your point, I think the back door is very wide open with this matchup. I think the Jags have always kind of played the Texans relatively close as well. But not that you can really play in years past for that. But I just got to lean towards the 6 here, I think. It just seems like a couple of 2 minutes to be laying with. And who has been dysfunctional. And I don't think that's maybe all entirely on Bill O'Brien.
Yeah, this is going to be a hard week because, first of all, a lot of the games are off the board right now. So it's hard to make assessments on pricing and how that's going to play out. And there's a lot of really big spreads. This is a game I'm probably not going to play in any meaningful way. haven't seen anything to buy on the Texans right now. I mean, they haven't won a game, much less win a game by a touchdown, even necessarily versus the Jags. But again, I'm by no means necessarily a believer in the Jags. I mean, this could be a get-right game for the Texans, and they finally put in one of those offensively explosive performances, and we get bad Gardner Minshew and like standard like miserable Jags, and this is 33-13 type game, or that could not happen at all. And so I just don't have a feel. I have no view. Cardinals minus another touchdown on the road versus the Jets.
Yeah, so I look at that game and I want to lay the points with the Cardinals, but I don't know. This just seems like the spot, minus Darnold now being out for the Jets. But I was saying earlier in the week before Darnold was ruled out that this just seems like this is maybe the Jets spot, which is kind of weird to say after a team's looked as bad as they are. But I think to their credit then with that, like they've really been thrown down at this point. And they get extra prep for this game in New York. Arizona's traveling. Additionally, I think Arizona's offense has just looked really bad the last 2 weeks. And I think that maybe Arizona is still a little overvalued in the market from their win over the 9 and their Washington in week 2. They've put in 2 pretty bad performances versus the Panthers and Lions, who I don't arguing are both bottom 10 teams. So I think with Kyler Murray not looking great, I think it's pretty hard to maybe a touchdown. It's kind of don't know if I can really. You take a lot of guts, I think, to take the 7 with the Jets, but it's a game where I don't have a strong feel for at this point. But yeah, that's really all I got.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I don't have too much to add here. I would say Flacco's probably definitely a downgrade. I don't know how he's going to really be able to move around in the pocket. Their offensive line is torn to shreds. We'll see what kind of wide receiver connections they'll have back this week. But I think this could be a game where, we see the Cardinals of the first 2 weeks, their offense. This is a good opportunity as any to get right. Versus the Jets defense, who, Brett Rippon tore apart last Thursday. I think this team is ready to give up, just flat out give up on Gase. I think a blowout would definitely help solidify that case. And I think, if we're looking for a pattern in the Cardinals' performances, to your point, they put in 2 not great performances, 2 losses in a row in 2 games that they were favored. But the one thing that would just make me a little bit uneasy is it doesn't seem like the market's downgraded them that much off those performances. To your point, this does seem like a lot of points. I would much rather see this at like 5.5 under 6. So 7 is tough, but I'm not betting Jets here. Not +7. Nope, no way.
Right. Here's one take for you that I thought actually, and I've mentioned this, I think, on some of our previous podcasts. Kyler Murray, what does he excel against? He's excelled against strong defensive lines, because I think that maybe forces him to get the ball out quick in like 1-2 second little quick dropbacks, as well as he then maybe will scramble a little more. And that's a strong point of his game. So we look at week 1, he was going against that Niners full strength defensive line. That offense looked great. Week 2, went against Washington's defense line. Cardinals offense looked great. Week 3 and week 4, he saw the Detroit and the Panthers defensive lines, 2 of the weaker defensive lines in the NFL. So I think to that, he had more time to sit in the pocket, more time to kind of maybe try to make decisions. And that's not his strong point. I think it's maybe when he was getting those 6-yard curls to Hopkins or was forced to start scrambling. I think that's when that offense was seeing success. So now we look at the Jets and what's their strength on defense. It's definitely that defensive line. So I think that's maybe one thing that I would help me lean toward the Cardinals even more here.
Yep, definitely agree. Eagles plus another touchdown at the Steelers. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of thoughts here. The Steelers, they're coming off their bye kind of with the COVID, but their team didn't experience any COVID. So I think it is kind of a true bye for the Steelers in some way. They've been really hot so far to start the season. I think that defense is clicking, as well as Philadelphia. I don't know if I have a strong feel on them. I've tried to bet them a couple times, and then the week I don't bet them but lean them, that's the week they put it together outright. So I can't say that I have a strong feel for the Eagles. I still think there's a lot of upside in the Eagles. So that's where it's hard to would be hard to lay the 7 with the Steelers. I'll have to look at this game a lot more, but right now I kind of lean toward the under in this game, no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of been the story of our season so far is, not having a rhythm on some of these teams and still continuing to bet those teams. And it's kind of just been a really bad pattern there. But in this one, I got to lean the Steelers. I think, they've gotten the extra prep, even if it was a little bit distracting. So I'm not going to give them like too much benefit of the doubt there. But the Eagles definitely will be coming off, a nice win on the road versus San Francisco, where San Francisco was also incredibly beat up. And I feel like, again, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, was substantively played better, was winning that game. If you take away basically 2 bonehead Nick Mullins interceptions, one that went for a pick 6, another one that was a great drive by the Niners, looking like it was probably going to be converted into a touchdown through that pick in the red zone. That's a possibly like a 14-point swing right there. If that is the case, the Niners win this one by almost double digits. I didn't see anything necessarily in the Eagles that I would upgrade them. They still look like, they're still totally beat up with injuries. The Steelers are relatively healthy, have a great defense. I think the defense is going to give Carson Wentz a lot of problems. I think it could be a lower scoring affair. But I feel like even with the 7, given some of the bigger spreads that we've seen, it looks like this might tick down up to 6.5, but we'll see. It's going to be hard to probably get too much buy-in on the Eagles, but I probably lean Steelers here. Giants +10 at the Cowboys. We bet the Giants every week this season. And we're 2-2, so not too bad. But I got to rewatch this Giants-Rams game to really see how they performed in that instance. If the Giants offense can do anything, I think they can cover this 10. Seems like a lot of points to a Cowboys defense that cannot stop anybody ever at any point until the opposing offense literally goes into prevent, or the opposing offense literally just goes into like super conservative mode, and you know exactly what they're going to do because they're up by 20. So I'd probably lean Giants here at this point in time. How about you?
Yeah, I don't see how I could come to playing Dallas at this point with how bad their defense has been. To lay that 10, as bad as the Giants maybe offenses looked as well, I think the Giants will maybe be able to move the ball here, and I think they'll be able to keep this maybe within the number. I just don't trust, I guess, Dallas to really get that margin at this point. We look at this number, and it seems really high. The look ahead on this game was Cowboys -11.5, and I don't know. I think I got to lean with the Giants here. I don't have a whole lot on this game other than that number just seems a little bit too high.
Yeah. Colts -2 at the Browns. I'm a little bit surprised by this one. I would think that this would be closer to a pick. I would probably lean Browns here, but it doesn't seem sharp to do so. So this is something I'd have to look a little bit more into. I just haven't seen really great performances from the Colts. And at least the Browns look like they're getting better kind of like week by week, which is kind of what we expected with the new coaching staff, etc., that they were going to get better week by week by week. And if that's the case, I think they can win this game.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I'm leaning towards the Browns here as well. It also doesn't feel too sharp, but It's a game where I think we're seeing two teams that are coming in pretty hot. Just seeing what the Browns did to the Cowboys last week and seeing what the Colts did to the Bears and what the Colts have done all season, as well as the Browns. They've honestly probably outperformed maybe some people's expectations. So I think at this point I'll lean with the Browns, but I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on this game. Colts are on back-to-back road games, so there's that going for Cleveland. It might be a decent spot, but they did just lose Nick Chubb, which has been one of the best backs in the league the last couple of years. So Kareem Hunt's going to have to take on that whole load. So
yeah, that is noteworthy. And I would also look to the Cleveland Browns defense as well. As I know they started to get a little bit healthier in that game versus the Cowboys, so we'll be we'll be good to monitor, especially their secondary health. So the last game on the board that we actually have available to us, as far as available spread right now, Vikings +7. Again, another touchdown plus game at Seattle. I don't necessarily feel too strongly here one way or the other. It's kind of like the same narrative across so many games. Is you got offenses that can score points and you have defenses that can't stop anybody. The Seahawks shouldn't have covered versus the Dolphins on the road. So how much, so how do you compare the Vikings versus the Dolphins? The Vikings offense has definitely come around a little bit in the last few games. And I mean, their offense really wasn't ever the problem. It was more so their defense. And if their defense is going to play really poor again, are they going to be able to stop the Seahawks at all? I think the Seahawks will be able to at least stop the Vikings sometimes. But is that enough to cover a touchdown? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, my thoughts are the Seahawks are coming into this game, I think, really at their pinnacle. They beat the Patriots, but they maybe shouldn't have deserved to cover that game. If we remember, there's a goal line stop.
Yeah.
They against the Cowboys, they couldn't really stop that offense either, and that came down to the Cowboys kind of just running out of time. It took a 4th down, I think, conversion as well to Metcalf in the end zone. I don't know. It's hard to say who maybe deserved to cover that game, but another one they kind of squeaked by. And then as well as the Dolphins, I definitely don't think they deserve to cover that. The Dolphins stalled quite a few times in the red zone. And so they're coming in on 3 straight against the spread wins. So I think they're maybe starting to become a little bit overvalued. This defense isn't good right now, especially with it being banged up. So yeah, Russ is kind of carrying the load. 7 feels a little steep, but then I look at Minnesota and some of the spots I know that I don't like playing Minnesota is Kirk Cousins in primetime. He's absolutely brutal. So that alone, along with Kirk Cousins versus winning teams, he's also very brutal. So a lot of that maybe could be tied to better defenses on winning teams. So that's one thing that I want to look into more. But then we also know Russ, he's been a machine on primetime games. So I definitely think Seattle comes away with winning this, but the 7 does feel a little, I'm not too sure on at this point, but I'd probably lean to Seattle, but ever so slightly.
Indeed. So that wraps that up, especially with some of the lines that we have. I think maybe the last one we can touch on very quickly, Chargers and Saints on Monday. Chargers are currently +7.5. I mean, I would probably lean Chargers here. I feel like, Herbert is coming around, getting a little bit more understanding of that offense, is able to execute some deeper downfield passes, especially if the Saints are still banged up. Michael Thomas probably will be back. But I mean, I'm not a great believer still in the Saints. I don't think that they're going to make the playoffs. Chargers defense obviously is also injured. Again, kind of the same story across all these teams, which makes evaluating some of these spreads in some of these games just so difficult this year. So many moving variables, so many moving pieces. But do you have any preliminary lean here, Corey?
My lean will probably go as Michael Thomas goes. If it looks like he's going to be playing and pretty full, ready to go, I think I'll maybe lean with the Saints. But if he's not ready to go, I think that's too many points to be taking the Saints in the spot. I think the Chargers defense, yeah, they're a little bit beat up, but I think this defense is pretty solid still. And I think it'll travel pretty well. So I don't know. Drew Brees is pretty good in primetime as well. This would be Herbert's first start in primetime. Not going to weigh into that too much, but I think this spread, I'll lean with kind of how Michael Thomas goes most likely.
Yep. And we are getting into now the more difficult part of the season. So we really need to start outperforming, especially given the lukewarm kickoff to the season, because now we're going to start to have real buys in the season. So Lions and Packers are having their official buys this week. And now we're also having these de facto COVID buys. Games not showing up with spreads or even being decided if they're going to play at all until the last minute. Chiefs was a game, that we kind of liked, for instance, for our contests, but we didn't know if the game was even going to be played. So we didn't even, we kind of omitted that game. And as this kind of happens throughout the season, when you start losing access to games because of more buys or COVID or et cetera, it's going to be harder and harder to really find and isolate, opportunity. And then as the market kind of tightens the spread on some of these games, as it understands some of these teams better, that also makes it increasingly difficult to kind of pull out and extract alpha on a week in and week out basis. So that wraps up kind of our broader week 4 recap and week 5 look ahead. Corey, did you have any final thoughts on anything that you might want to share? I know you had mentioned that you wanted to talk very briefly about something around the Chiefs and Patriots game.
Yeah, I thought that Chiefs and Patriots game was maybe a little bit deceiving. I think it's important to realize the Patriots are really in that game. If it wasn't for a sack and then maybe I believe a fumble as well on 2 different separate drives in the red zone where they would at least got field goals versus the Chiefs and kept that game a lot closer. That game got out of the way too with a pick 6. So I think we look at that final score and we think the Chiefs maybe kind of handled the Patriots. But we got to remember they were playing with 2 quarterbacks that completely changed how they wanted to play that game probably from a play calling standpoint.
Sure.
So I really think just looking forward, maybe to a potential playoff matchup down the road, I think the Chiefs are pretty scared of the Patriots, maybe even more so than they would be scared of the Ravens. They've seen the Ravens, they've beat the Ravens, whereas this Patriots team has played them. I think that game was actually pretty tight, and I think they'd be pretty scared to go against Belichick for the second time, especially knowing how good he is when he sees the team once already in the season.
Yeah, excellent points. And there's one thing too that I'll close on the Chiefs that I was talking to you guys, about during the game was that, we saw it kind of in the Texans game, we saw it in the Chargers game, and now we kind of saw it again in the Patriots game, that the Chiefs are going to execute a vanilla playbook if they think they can get away with it. They're not going to come in here, maybe like the Ravens, and try to blow you out every single game and put on some great performance and have, Lamar Jackson doing spin moves by the Bengals so you can win by 30. That's not the Chiefs' MO. Andy Reid is not John Harbaugh. And I think that, if we start to see some really big Chiefs spreads, that might be opportunity to bet against them, especially if it's not a prime time sort of game where they want to really make any sort of statement. I think they want to keep the playbook on the lockdown. They don't want to reveal too much about some of their decision-making, play calling, and things like that. I don't think they want to put themselves in position to get hurt. So they want to play a relatively conservative and game plan with a vanilla playbook. Again, if they think they can get away with it, if they think they can sneak out with a win, why reveal too much? This team is not going to be looking to cover spreads the way that we've seen them in the past. And the Ravens, I think, especially with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they think they can get away with running the ball more often than they ever could, especially in the last year and a half. So I think just something to be careful about, especially when evaluating Chiefs and Chiefs games moving forward. So that wraps it up. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to jumping into week 5 and moving into a new quarter and continuing to deliver outperformance. Thanks, everyone. And that's the closing bell.